Welcome to the Histories of Northamptonshire podcast series, and this episode number 91. Recorded on location, each episode tells the story of one of the many and varied objects which are the focus of the exhibition A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects. The exhibition runs at the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery between the 20th of September 2025 and February 2026. Selected by local individuals, heritage groups and the museum's own curators, each object tells a different story from the county's past. And so, to our guest for this episode.
My name's Will Osborne and I run Osborne's Toy Shop in Rushden High Street. The shop's been there quite a long time now. In fact, this year we're celebrating our 70th anniversary, so we should be putting out the bunting later on this year.
And that leads us on to the object. So, what is the object that you've got in the exhibition?
The object that we've chosen for the exhibition is a 1955 tin plate metal racing car made by Mettoy. It's about 16 inches long. It's a beautiful thing. I wouldn't say it was a work of art, but it's certainly a lovely object. It's blue, it's tin printed. As I say, it's clockwork. The steering works, it's got a brake. And the reasons that we chose it was A, because it was such a lovely looking object, B, because it was made in the county, and also because it was a racing car. It's the sort of racing car that you would have seen Stirling Moss and Fangio drive, and of course with Silverstone just up the road, the real ones would have been racing around there in the mid-50s.
What sort of reputation did Northamptonshire have for toy manufacture? Because this is a fairly large model car. It would have been owned by a youngster and have been a prized possession.
Oh, absolutely. It wouldn't have been a cheap object in its day. Mettoy were tin plate and metal toy manufacturers. In fact, the name Mettoy is a contraction of metal toys. A couple of chaps called Ullman and Katz, who actually had worked in Germany for a toy company called Tip & Co. Beginning of the 1930s, with the coming to power of Hitler and Nazism, because they were Jewish, they thought it was probably best to get out. So they came to England, and Mr. Marx, or Lord Marx, who was Marks and Spencer's, he helped them to set up a factory in Northampton, initially on Stimpson Avenue in about 1935, and then they moved to some larger premises in Halveston Road towards the end of the 1930s.
Do we happen to know why Northamptonshire was chosen and why Northampton is where the factory was based?
Possibly, in the case of Mettoy, pure blind luck. It's just that the factories were available, so they decided to come here.
So the area, the county, therefore, started to develop a name for toy manufacture, and presumably there would have been a massive market for toys coming out of the county. This was big economics.
Oh, absolutely, yes. I mean, the county is known primarily for boot and shoe, but I would say, as a good secondary industry, the toy industry was quite big just before the war, and especially in the 50s and 60s, especially with people like Mettoy and Bassettloke and Rosebud.
This particular racing car, what would have been the engineering challenges of making something like this? Because in today's world, mass production, you hardly think about the production process itself. Were these handmade? Were these machine-made or what?
They would have been primarily machine-made, but hand-finished and hand-assembled. The engineers at the factory would have made the die tools to make the particular objects in question. The tin would have been printed beforehand with the pattern of what was going to be on the actual object in the end, and then it would have been pressed under great pressure and moulded into the shapes that they needed. They would have been moulded and pressed and cut out with tiny little metal tabs on the sides of the metal, which fitted into slots on the next piece of metal, and it was bent over and made into a three-dimensional object.
So this was almost like making something in a metal form of origami in that case. There wouldn't have been any welding or soldering or anything like that.
Yes, you're absolutely right. Lots and lots of components made with the tool makers and then assembled, I would imagine. I haven't seen any photographs of inside the Mettoy factory. There must have been some, but usually by lady workers. I know certainly if you look at the Hornby factory, the Meccano factory up in Liverpool, 90% of the workforce on the assembly lines was women.
And this was proper factory assembly lines, or would this have been piecework?
The larger items would definitely be factory assembly lines. Some of the smaller items might well have been piecework. with the advent of plastics and smaller things that had to be painted rather than tin printed, the factories would send out boxes of, say, plastic figures that need to be painted to the various homes of the people, and they would paint them at home, as you said, piecework.
You run a toy shop. What would a car like this have cost in relative terms?
I would guess, in relative terms, it probably would have cost somewhere in the region of half a week's wages for the average man. You know, it wasn't a cheap throwaway item.
And as you've already said, this would have been a prized toy. It would have been a prized possession. Children would have learnt about looking after their toys, but it would have seen proper play. It would have been a proper toy for a youngster to enjoy.
Oh, absolutely. I mean, in the mid-50s when this toy was produced, certainly the resemblance to the modern racing cars of the day, the boy or girl who would have had it would have put themselves, you know, mentally in the driving seat, wound it up and be whizzing around the carpet or the garden, pretending to be Stirling Moss.
This is a car. Would this have gone up against, say, train sets in the time? Because production processes presumably were very similar for both.
Yes, it would. It would probably have been an either-or. This particular one, I mean, there were a lot cheaper tin toys about, made by other manufacturers, but Mettoy did make very, very good quality metal toys, which is one of the reasons things like this survive.
We're talking about mass production. Would this particular car have been widely available across the UK? I'm trying to get some sense as to how many of these things might have existed, and indeed, in terms of scarcity, how many of them remain today? Is there any idea of what numbers?
Not really, no, you can only guess. I mean, Mettoy were, in terms of the toy industry, quite a large player at that time in the 1950s. The objects would have been available countrywide, and of course they would have gone to export as well. I would have thought the production would have been probably in the thousands, possibly just the tens of thousands. But of course, compared to the hundreds of thousands that you get today, it's a small number. But then, because it was so expensive, they wouldn't have sold as many as they would have done had it been made of plastic.
You're talking about the 70th anniversary of Osborne's, the business that carries your name. Count back 70 years, we're almost at the era when this toy was made.
Oh, absolutely.
Did you stock them?
Yes, Father would have stocked Mettoy toys. Whether he stocked this particular model, I don't know, but it's certainly a distinct possibility that he would have taken Mettoy products in his shop, yes.
So, Will, by extension, did you play with toys like this?
Luckily, I'm not quite that old. But certainly I would have played with the sort of descendants of toys like this. I mean, if we are talking about Northamptonshire toys, Rosebud Mattel were a huge company in the 1960s, which were based in Raunds and Wellingborough and Rushden. And because Rosebud had tied up with Mattel from the States, obviously Mattel were the company that made Barbies and all sorts of things, they had a line called Hot Wheels, which most people of my age would remember, and I used to love my Hot Wheels.
I certainly remember Hot Wheels from the days of my childhood. Yeah. Were they made here as well?
Yes, the factory in Rixton Road in Wellingborough certainly manufactured items for the Hot Wheels range. I'm led to believe that the cars came in from the Far East in huge big boxes and they were packed in Wellingborough, but certainly Wellingborough did make quite a lot of the plastic components like the tracks and the speedometers and various bits and pieces for them.
So now we're starting to talk about globalisation, we're starting to talk about a different kind of production, all perhaps originating from those two gentlemen who left Germany, came and set their business up in Northamptonshire, and of course Mettoy developed from there. What does this object for you say about Northamptonshire?
Well, it says to me that, you know, if you do look back at the history, because I mean a lot of these companies don't exist anymore, particularly in the 1950s and 60s, Northamptonshire was a very important place for toy manufacture. As I said, with Mettoy all over the country, export all over the world, Rosebud Mattel all over the country, all over the world. There's various other companies that are tied in. It's a bit like the boot and shoe, really. You get the people who make the boot and shoe, but then you get all the subsidiary little companies around there that supply the materials and the expertise and various other components in order for that factory to work. There was an engineer called John Orme who worked for Vickers during the war in Coventry. He moved to Higham Ferrers and started working for a little company called Cyril Norris as an engineer. Then he moved out on his own and he invented the rotary moulding machine, where you could make hollow plastic objects out of polyurethane without injection moulding. So therefore that brought on a whole new range of toy making, i.e. footballs, because you can make circular footballs. Mettoy noticed this and thought we could make a space hopper. So they made a space hopper with this injection moulding technique that had been invented by John Orme, who happened to be in the county. He also invented, with the help of the Metropolitan Police, the road cone, because that was the sort of thing that could be made on this machine.
Will, you've taken me down to the days of my youth and you've brought me right back to the present day. I would be delighted to have a model car such as the one that is now in the exhibition, as I'm sure a lot of people who will come and visit will make their minds up towards as well. It's been fascinating to hear from you. I hope children enjoy their toys and look after them in the way that a youngster would have enjoyed and looked after this particular exhibit. Thank you for telling me the story today.
It's a pleasure, thank you.
Thank you for listening to this Histories of Northamptonshire podcast. If you would like to find out more about the objects or listen to other episodes in the series, go to www.northamptonmuseums.com. Alternatively, you can visit the Northampton Museum and Art Gallery, where you can see the A History of Northamptonshire in 100 Objects exhibition for yourself. The Histories of Northamptonshire project is funded by Arts Council England as part of the National Portfolio Programme.